Hello and welcome. The 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26, has kicked off in Glasgow on this morning in Scotland from the 31st of October till the 12th of November. Leaders from almost 200 countries will gather at this summit, aiming to strengthen the climate targets set in the Paris Agreement at COP21 in 2015. Now, the goal of this agreement, signed 6 years ago, was to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably at 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, according to the UN and according to experts, to achieve this, countries will need to commit to more ambitious national targets for cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So the question now is, can COP26 really save the planet? What will India's stand be? Prime Minister Modi is to attend the summit on the 1st and 2nd of November, and this comes amidst international calls for India to raise our climate commitments. After China and the United States, India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and we're still largely dependent on coal and oil. Our energy demands are also expected to rise sharply over the next decade because our economy is growing and needs to grow. So the question is, can India adopt environment-friendly technologies without having an adverse impact on our economy? And what are the challenges at arriving at a consensus, and what is going to be on the top of India's agenda? Joining us on the show tonight, Amitav Ghosh, who explores the latest history of climate change in his most recent book, The Nutmeg's Curse. We have Ulka Kelkar, Director of the Climate World Resources Institute, India. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow and Program Director of Earth Science and Climate Change at TERI, a former Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, the Government of India. We have Avantika Goswami, a Deputy Program Manager of Climate Change at the Centre for Science and Environment, and Amitabh Behar, CEO of Oxfam India, and Asif Bamla, spokesperson of the BJP, environmentalist and the founder of the Bamla Foundation. Let's Amitav Ghosh, to you first, the author of The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. Why is this COP26 so critical? Why is it a pivotal moment for people, for the planet? We've had so many summits like this before, and given the pandemic, isn't there the looming likelihood of economic recovery from the pandemic forcing a resetting of climate correction clocks? The question is, can we expect anything? Can we get a big moment out of COP26?
Sarah, well, I think you put it very well. For years now, we've heard that we're running out of time, and we now really are running. We are completely out of time. We can see all these terrible climate events all around us, affecting every part of the globe, really. But the sad reality is that this Glasgow meeting, COP26, has already catastrophically failed. This is the elephant in the room that nobody is talking about. The presidents of three of the biggest players are not going to be there. The president of China, the president of Russia, the president of Brazil, none of them are going to be there. This already shows us that these meetings have been greatly devalued. And one of the principal reasons for that is that the entire process has been repeatedly torpedoed by the United States. I think Donald Trump's walking out of the Paris Agreement just dealt a death blow to this entire process, a death blow that cannot be reversed. President Biden certainly rejoined and so on, but in a way, the system is now broken. And a large part of the responsibility, I'm sorry to say, does lie with the United States. Not only did the United States repeatedly torpedo this thing, the entire process, the punitive sanctions regimes that is brought to bear upon Russia and China, again, have destroyed any kind of trust that there ever was in what's called the international system.
Really pessimistic, but perhaps expectations of real progress are higher this time because the risks are hitting home. We've seen floods this year kill 200 people in Germany. Heat waves have struck Canada, the Siberian Arctic was burning. But Ulka Kelkar, I want to first talk about India, or bring in India here. After China and the United States, India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. We're still largely dependent on coal and oil. What is India hoping to come away with from this summit? How much maneuvering do we really have to give and take? Because there are international calls for India to raise our climate commitments.
Thanks, Sarah. I would take a slightly more optimistic view than Mr. Ghosh has taken.
Good, I'm so glad.
I would emphasize less on the brinkmanship of the negotiations and more on really the fact that, India has a lot to lose from climate change, but also much to gain from adopting a climate-friendly pathway. So it's irrefutable, our principal stance, that we are not who has caused this problem. Our past emissions have been very low. Our current emissions per person are still well below the world average. But our future emissions, our emissions from meeting our unmet energy needs, from building our infrastructure, they lie ahead of us. So what's at stake for us really is perhaps much more so than what's at stake for other countries. And what we are hoping from this particular COP is that all countries together collectively will rapidly cut emissions in this decade to keep alive the hope of staying within 1.5 degrees Celsius of safe warming by the end of the century. And just this evening, just an hour ago, the G20 leaders, including Prime Minister Modi in Rome, have signed a communique, have agreed that they will work together to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. What, of course, we need from this COP is reassurances from the developed countries that they will make up for the shortfalls of climate finance. Which
we're just getting this statement coming in. Piyush Goyal speaking ahead of COP26, saying India will represent the voice of the developing world, will protect the interests of humanity. It sounds like a lot of blunt language on the eve of the COP. Let me just play this bite a little bit and then we can carry on with this discussion.
Developed countries, which have already enjoyed the fruits of low-cost energy for several years, will have to go in for net zero much faster and possibly even go in for net negative so that they can release policy space and some carbon space for the developing countries to pursue their development agenda.
Okay, Amitabh Behar, in that context, you heard the tone of the minister there, certainly much more confrontationalist, like a strong stand, blunt language on the eve of the COP, let's put it that way. You also heard Ulka Kelkar say that India has much to lose from climate change and much to gain from adopting a climate-friendly path to development. So, in that context, what is the challenge ahead for India? Because, the World Meteorological Organization report said that India lost some $87 billion due to natural disasters last year. So, in that context, what is the challenge for India?
Sure, I would say that let's start with optimism. There's absolutely no plan B. We've seen that in the last year, whether you saw the fires in Brazil, whether you saw the huge storms in our own Bay of Bengal. So it's something which is hitting us hard. Let's accept that reality. And there's absolutely no other option. And I would very strongly endorse what the minister is saying. Because we did, as Oxfam released a report confronting carbon inequality last year. So the top 1% of the population, which is say 70 million people, actually consumed twice the carbon budget of the bottom 50%. That's the level of inequality. Yep. So I think it's absolutely critical now that we drive home this point. But let me also say, Sarah, what's very critical that yes, we are doing reasonably well in terms of our NDCs. We are on path in terms of achieving that, but that's going to be extremely inadequate. And we have to acknowledge, everybody is talking of now transformational targets. You cannot continue with some incremental changes. So while we have our NDCs, we need to really now take the game much higher and come up with very transformative targets. And let me just also add a couple of more things. One, while I've talked of inequality, I think it's critical, and anyways, we believe that climate change and social injustice, economic inequalities are all different sides of the same coin. But so within the country also, it's very important. Just because our per capita emissions are low, it should not become that our carbon budget is then consumed by the super rich. And in this context, I think the developed countries must commit to climate financing, technology transfer, capacity building. That should be an absolutely non-negotiable. And as I said, there's absolutely no plan B. We have to crack it at this moment. Hopefully the COVID told us that we need fundamental changes. We need to take a pause and reboot ourselves in a new way.
Asif Bamla, India is the world's third biggest emitter. We have yet to follow China, the US and the European Union in setting a target for reaching net zero emissions. Negotiators are hoping that, Prime Minister Modi will announce such a goal in Glasgow. But of course, going by the statement I just heard from Piyush Goyal, that doesn't seem like it's going to be likely. But you've heard all of our speakers here. The fact is we're in a very tough position because as much as, we need our economy to grow, as our panelists have pointed out, there's no plan B, there's no other planet for us to live in. And we, India ourselves, pay the higher price when it comes to climate change fallout.
You see, I would like to be a little optimistic. As you know, this COP26 is is a cooperation at Glasgow, and on the basis of Paris Agreement, India has set for a target for cutting the carbon emissions from 33% to 35%. But by 2030, I think we should be able to intensify this and to reduce it by at least 40%. And I don't see any because India and Qatar is very passionate as far as the environment is concerned. You see the G20 summit, we have highlighted India's fight on COVID and Earth and One Health.
Can we just try and fix Mr. Bamla's line so we can hear him a little more clearly? R.R. Rashmi, then if you could just respond, you heard Piyush Goyal there talking about the idea of zero emissions, but that is an idea, zero emissions by 2050, that is being advocated as a panacea for climate change, right? Our take on that, how much of a challenge is that for India?
Thank you, Sarah. The net zero goal by 2050 may be extremely relevant goal for those countries that have espoused it. But for a country like India, which is still in the phase of growth, a net zero goal by 2050 is too distant. It doesn't mean anything. In fact, for the world as a whole also, it doesn't mean anything because currently we have to enhance our climate ambition in the immediate time frame of 2030. Yeah. And you are aware of the emissions gap report, which has said that the major economies have failed on this. So there is a huge gap in terms of filling the emissions, the reductions compared to what science requires. So we have to act on that in the time frame of 2030. That is the immediate and most pressing challenge. So 2050 is ultimately even the G20 leaders have just today recognized that by mid-century they have to halt the emissions to be able to stabilize the climate. But that's very fine. But we need to see that the world acts right and here and now because the climate crisis is deepening and therefore we must raise the climate ambition now itself. And India will certainly contribute. I think they have done well so far and I think there is room for improvement. But that's not the real story. The real story is that when people talk about net zero goal by 2050, they're actually talking about coal. They're actually talking about fossil fuel subsidies. Now that is actually diverting the real question. Because for countries which do not have access to alternative sources of energy at this moment and which are really in the growth path where energy needs are rising, I think you're talking about phasing out coal, phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. In the name of inefficient, they want to phase out everything. So that is a distraction from the main issue. Main issue is that the climate ambition must be enhanced by all countries which are contributors to the global emissions.
It just seems like this 26 COP is just going to be fractious with developed countries led by the United States, pushing for this deadline on ceasing net carbon dioxide emissions, and developing countries and India certainly going by a stand not in agreement. So let me just ask you all of you feel strongly for the environment, feel strongly in the issue of climate change, feel that India needs to do our bit basically to ensure our own future. So let me just start by asking each of you, if you could just tell me then what is according to you the solution? Ulka Kelkar, to you first.
Thanks. Sarah, this is personal. In 2050, my daughter will be the age that I am today. Yeah. So we are not talking about that much in the future. Also, the Paris Agreement, however flawed it may be, is working. Before the agreement was signed, we were headed for 4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. With the Paris pledges, we were headed for 3 degrees. And as of today, with the announced pledges, we are within striking distance of 2 degrees Celsius. So I think we need to take an optimistic, constructive approach. There are many simple things India can do. We have already planned this 450 gigawatts of renewable energy, which will mean that in just 9 years, 60%, the majority of our electricity, will be renewable electricity capacity. It means simple things like renewable energy for rural hospitals. It means industrial energy efficiency for micro, small and medium enterprises that struggle to get finance. It means things like replacing the trucks on the road with more of goods rail. Of course, in the long term, in the next decade of the 2040s, we will need to have more of clean fuels like green hydrogen, which right now are very expensive. But again here, India is laying the building blocks of the research and development that is required to drive down the costs of these new technologies. So I think with a lot of policies and actions that are in our hands as of today, plus laying the foundations of new technologies in the next 2 decades, I think India can achieve a much greener and healthier and robust economic future for its citizens.
All right. Avantika Goswami, sorry, we were having some technical issues in getting you on. I'm sorry for making you wait for so long. But if you could just come in here before you come up with the solutions, what are the critical, contentious issues for India? How do we balance? I mean, this is the very thin line that we're walking here.
Hi Sarah, thank you for having me on, and sorry if there were issues at my end technically as well. So in terms of COP26, I'll focus for a second on the multilateral international side of things. So there are a few key themes that we will be watching out for. So of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion about net zero, which we believe is simply a delaying tactic for developed countries to not cut emissions today and delay it to later in the century. But we will be focusing on enhanced climate ambition, which countries are pledging to make the most ambitious emissions cuts within this decade, that's within 2030. We'll be looking at climate finance. Are developed nations actually going to commit to $100 billion and upwards in climate finance? And is this going to be tangible, both for climate change mitigation as well as adaptation? And that's a good segue to then talk about the next theme. We'll be looking at the progress on adaptation. It's a critical topic for India. There are large parts of our coastline which are already getting inundated by sea level rise. What kind of financing mechanisms will be made tangibly available for adaptation for the developing world? And lastly, we'll be looking at the progress on loss and damage, which essentially means what kind of compensation or reparations can be paid to countries in the global south that have already suffered because of climate change that they have not caused. So if an island nation has lost its home because of sea level rise, what kind of financing or compensation will be provided to those victims? So we expect to see some tangible outcomes on loss and damage beyond just rhetoric and committee formations. So
none of these are easy to work out. Mr. Bamla's line is back up. So sorry, Mr. Bamla, go ahead. India stand. What is India's stand likely to be at this summit?
You see, as we said, we can change climate change, mitigate, adopt and act. You see, the G20 summit that happened prior to now, the COP26 summit, where the Prime Minister obviously highlighted the vision of one Earth, one health. We all aware about it. You see, so issues relating to the global economy, stability, climate change mitigation and sustainable development are equally important. But at the same time, if you see, India has to go in for cutting the emissions, as we committed 33 to 35% by 2030. And we have to lower these emissions to intensify it by at least minimum by at least to 40%. Now, as far as COP26 is concerned, we are aware that there is an alliance between India and Britain for the green grid, of what I understand. That's one sun, one world, and obviously one grid via the International Solar Alliance, which is equally very, very critical. You see, in larger interest, connecting the world solar energy via one grid is what I understand, you see. So along with the other world leaders, I think India, having a passionate Prime Minister with a large vision on environment. I mean, of course, this time it's very demeaning to not have China and Russia on the COP, but that doesn't affect, stop the narrative of environment. You see, the cause of environment is too large for countries like, I was hearing from Mr. Ghosh that with China and Russia not volunteering it, the basic fabric of this fight, this climate change will not be very effective. I mean, let's be very, very positive, because you see, India, along with other leaders, you see, could be the driving force in the global sustainable alliance in the world. I mean, India has always been steadfast. Even in the Paris Agreement, we have committed. Of course, there are certain challenges that we have faced, and of course, we also understand that we are the third.
Okay, so you're saying this is an opportunity for India to come forward, maybe form new alliances with different countries, come up with different ideas, because the current alliances haven't worked. But Amitabh Ghosh, since you were referred to, and yes, you point out that, America's stand on this is many fingers being pointed there, but the irony is that America has been badly affected. We just recently saw those visuals of the New York City, Brooklyn, where you are right now. Most of these basements flooded. The subway, many would say maybe it's like, it is over 100 years old, so it's only to be expected. But has this made the picture more real? Are we going to see shouldn't we be seeing a more earnest US at the COP table right now?
Well, first, what you said about New York, look, I mean, the subway system was, it was sort of refitted after Hurricane Katrina, so it should not have flooded in this way. It goes to show that the refitting didn't really work very well. But quite apart from the subway, it was a lot of people just drowning in basements, in basement apartments. And I don't know if you noticed this, but a lot of the people who died actually had Indian names. I think they were sort of of Indian origin, from Guyana or something. I was very struck by that. So again, inequality had a lot to do with that. But again, the larger point that you're making, look, in many senses, I think it's true. The country that is actually worst affected by climate change is the United States. If you look around the United States, the number of climate impacts that are occurring, Louisiana is losing one football field of land every hour or something. If you look at the effects of sea level rise across the East Coast, these rain bomb events, these cyclones, the incredible wildfires in California, there's a whole panoply of disasters unfolding across the United States. But have Americans really woken up to the nature of the threat? Sadly, I don't think that is the case. I don't think, even though many Americans do pay attention to this, I think a lot also do not. And for better or for worse, America is the global leader in these. They need to set a better example.
Well, everyone is affected, but why aren't we all acting? That is the irony of this situation. Today, perhaps we can still protect ourselves from the worst impacts of climate change and shape a healthier future. But for that, really, this needs to be the starting point for some transformational climate action. But thank you all, Ulka Kelkar, Amita Behar, R.R. Rashmi, Avantika Goswami, Asif Bamla, for speaking tonight. We've had this cricket match going on. But it's important to keep the spotlight on this issue. We'll continue to do it on We the People and on NDTV over the next week. Thank you all for your time tonight. That's it on Be the People. Bye-bye.